"If you tell anyone, I'll cut your tongue with a bread knife." That's what she told me, in that sweet tone, like she was teaching me how to bake a cake. I'm Mabel Louise Carter. I'm 84 years old today, and I carry that name like a dress that's 2 sizes too tight. From the outside, folks say I'm that smiling old lady, hair always done, never misses a Sunday service, always bringing pies to the church gatherings. But inside, sweetheart, inside there's still a 9-year-old girl who never understood why the one person who was supposed to care for her became the reason she was afraid. I was born and raised in Florence, a slow little town in South Carolina. My father's name was Henry Carter. Good man, quiet, worn down by life's losses. My mother died when I was 5. Pneumonia, they said. Suddenly it was just me and him. And he didn't know how to raise a child on his own. He worked day and night at a sawmill, came home smelling like wood and sweat, but his eyes were always heavy, like he was carrying the weight of the world. By 7, I was washing my own clothes and making my own breakfast. By 8, I was helping him with dinner and cleaning the house. He did what he could. He never raised his voice, but he also never asked how I was feeling. I was more like a piece of furniture, useful, present, silent. Then one day he showed up with a woman, tall, slim, jet black hair and light eyes that seemed to see more than they should. Her name was Vivian Moore, and just like that, she became my new mother, like the neighbors said. "Now you've got a woman around," my dad said that first night, not even looking at me. "It'll be good for you." Good. Funny word. Vivian came in with big suitcases and strong perfume. That first week she cooked, smiled, called me little one, said she wanted to teach me to be a proper young lady, gave me dresses she sewed herself, combed my hair roughly, said girls shouldn't walk around with messy curls. But it was in the second week that everything changed. My father started leaving earlier and coming home later. It was just me and her alone all day, and that's when it began. First, the long stares, then the touches that didn't make sense. "You need to get used to affection, Mabel," she'd say. "Your mother didn't teach you that, but I will." I was 9. I didn't know what was right or wrong. I just knew my body stiffened every time she got close. My stomach turned when she locked the kitchen door and said we were going to play a secret game. At first, I thought it was normal. She spoke so naturally, I figured maybe all families were like that. Maybe that's what being a stepdaughter meant. She called it love, said it was our special moment. And me, small and quiet, just obeyed. Because when I tried to run or complain, her tone would change. The sweet eyes turned hard. "You want your daddy to know? Want to make him sad because of you?" I'd shake my head. "No, of course not. I just wanted him to be happy." The worst part was when she laughed after, like it was a joke, like I was dumb for not understanding. Vivian was one of those who fooled everyone. At church, she was an angel. At the market, she talked to everyone, even won awards at the ladies' club for being an example of a new wife. My poor daddy thought he'd hit the jackpot. And me, I didn't even know it hurt. Not my body, but inside. Like my soul had become a dirty rag no one wanted to touch. I tried to tell someone once. I told a teacher, Miss Johnson, a redhead with glasses who always asked if I was okay. One day I gathered up my courage and said, "My new mom does strange things." She frowned and asked, "What do you mean, sweetheart?" But I froze. I stammered. I said she made me take my clothes off to measure me, that she said it was a game. Miss Johnson looked serious, but then just said, "Maybe she's trying to teach you about your body, Mabel." Sometimes mothers do that. I never said anything again. Not to her, not to anyone. But things really started to change when I turned 11. I'd gotten taller, my body was changing, and she started acting different too. Jealous. She'd tell me not to look at men on the street, called me a little tramp when I wore the dresses she made, bathed me even though I could clean myself, said she had to check if I was really clean. Around that time my father got a second job. The mill had cut his hours. He started making deliveries at night, and that, sweetheart, that's when the house became just me and her, and the nights began to hurt. But there was one day I never forgot. A Saturday afternoon, my dad left early for a delivery in another town. She made me wear a white dress, one of those Sunday ones, locked the living room door, and said, "Today, you're going to thank me for everything I've done for you." I won't tell you what she did, but that night when my father came home and asked why my eyes were swollen, she answered first. "It was the wind, Henry." She cried because of the dust, and he believed her. Because of course. Why wouldn't he? That day, something inside me died. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't coming back. If this story touched you in any way, sweetheart, leave a like for me. This isn't easy to share. Hold tight with me. I stopped looking at the clock after that Saturday. The hands moved, sure, but inside me, time had frozen. I was stuck at 9 years old, no matter how many birthdays passed. My body grew, my voice changed, but inside, I stayed in that living room, wearing that white dress, with her voice echoing like a stain that wouldn't wash out. Vivian never apologized. She never even acted like it was wrong. In fact, she started acting like we were closer. She called me her special little one, bought me a locket, and said I should never take it off because it meant I belonged to her. I wore it for weeks, not because I wanted to, because I was scared of what would happen if I didn't. By 12, I was waking up with nightmares most nights. My sheets soaked in sweat. I'd lie there in the dark, watching the shadow under the door, terrified it would stretch and twist and turn into her. Sometimes it did. Sometimes she came in with her hair still pinned, her nightgown smelling of powder and something sour. She'd sit on my bed, say she was just checking on me, but her hands always wandered, and I learned to hold still. Stillness was safer than resistance. My father still had no idea. How could he? I was quiet, obedient, never caused trouble. I did well in school, kept my chores done, smiled when I had to. And Vivian? She played the perfect wife, cooked his meals, massaged his feet, made sure he had peace at home. Peace for him meant silence for me. I remember one morning, he left his wallet on the table. I saw a $5 bill peeking out. I don't know what got into me, but I took it. I walked all the way to the drugstore and bought a cheap lock. That afternoon, I locked my bedroom door for the first time. Vivian didn't say anything, not at first, just looked at me long, her smile tight like a thread about to snap. That night she didn't come. The lock worked. And for a few days, I thought maybe I'd won something. But peace has a price. And when it came, it was worse. She stopped talking to me altogether. No more forced hugs, no more bedtime visits. She told my father I was becoming rebellious, that I needed discipline. He started watching me more, not with suspicion, but with concern. "She's just getting older, Viv," he said one night, thinking I wasn't listening. "Teenage girls are moody." Moody. That word still makes my jaw clench. Like everything I was carrying could be wrapped up in a word that rhymed with broody. Vivian waited. That's what she was good at. Waiting. Then one evening, she came home with a new rule. "No more locked doors," she said, loud enough for my father to hear from the porch. "This is a Christian home. We don't keep secrets here." He nodded like it made sense. So the lock came off, and she came back. Not every night. Just when he worked late or went out for drinks with the men from the mill. Just when the house was quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat. Just enough to keep me scared, but not broken. She liked it that way, liked having the power to decide when fear would visit me. There was one night, I was 13 by then, that she brought something new. She sat beside me on the couch and handed me a book. Said it was for understanding what love between women could mean. I opened it, saw the drawings, the words I didn't know yet. I felt sick, threw it on the floor. She slapped me so hard my ear rang for hours. "You think this is filth?" she hissed. "This is who you are now. This is what I've made you." That's when I knew she wasn't just doing things to me. She was molding me, shaping me like clay into something I didn't want to be. Not just hurting me, owning me. After that, I stopped eating much, stopped talking unless I had to. At school, they called me the ghost. Teachers asked if everything was all right at home. I lied, of course, said I was just tired, said we had a sick aunt we were caring for, said anything but the truth, because telling the truth meant saying things out loud I didn't have words for yet. And back then, no one believed girls like me, not when the villain was a woman, not when she smiled at everyone and said grace before every meal. But something changed when I turned 14. It wasn't just that I started to understand more. It was that she started getting careless. She got jealous. I'd started talking to a girl at school named Rosemary. Sweet thing, freckles all over, laughed at my dumb jokes. We'd walk home together sometimes, sit on the swing behind the library and share candy. Nothing more, just friendship. But Vivian noticed. "You're getting too friendly with that girl," she said one night, folding laundry with slow, angry hands. "Don't forget where your loyalty lies." I told her she was imagining things. The slap that followed knocked the air out of me. My head hit the doorframe. I remember the taste of blood, but what I remember most is what she whispered after. "You don't belong to her. You belong to me." That night I slept in the tool shed behind the house. It smelled of gasoline and dust, but it was quiet, safe, cold. I curled up behind an old mower and cried till my throat burned. And in that shed, something shifted. I started to think about leaving, not running away, just disappearing, fading out of her world, little by little. I didn't know how yet, but the seed was planted. I just didn't know that Vivian had already started planting something of her own. And what grew from it? Well, after that night in the shed, I stopped being afraid the same way. I still felt the tension in my chest, the panic every time I heard her footsteps on the floorboards, but something had shifted. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was anger, quiet and burning like a coal under the ribs. I didn't act on it, not then, but I started watching her, not with the eyes of a child, but the eyes of someone waking up from a long sleep. She didn't notice at first. Vivian still thought she had full control. She'd sit across from me at the dinner table and ask about school, all sweet. She'd run her hand over my hair in front of my father and say how proud she was. Every gesture calculated, every word wrapped in lace. My father, bless his heart, didn't see anything but a daughter, growing distant, moody, like teenagers did. He'd pat my shoulder and say, "You all right, baby?" And I'd nod, always nodding. But inside, I was building something. Rosemary was the only light in that time. We didn't talk about anything deep, just books, music, how stupid the boys were at school. But her voice made things feel lighter. She never asked why I flinched when someone touched me, or why I didn't like being invited to birthday parties. She just accepted me, awkward silences and all. One afternoon, we skipped last period and walked out to the creek behind the old dairy farm. It was warm, bugs humming around us, and we laid in the grass watching the clouds. She turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about leaving?" I didn't answer right away. I remember picking at the hem of my skirt, thinking about how small the world felt. "All the time," I finally said. She smiled, a little sad, and said, "Me too." That moment stuck with me. It felt like someone had cracked open a window in a room I didn't know was airtight. Vivian didn't like Rosemary. That much was clear. She'd say things like, "That girl's got no manners," or "She's not the kind of influence you need." I pretend not to hear, but every time I mentioned Rosemary, I'd find something missing the next day. My favorite hair clip, a book, once even the shoes I wore to school. Subtle punishments. She never accused, she just erased. I started hiding things. Notes from Rosemary, small mementos, even food I didn't eat. I tucked them under a loose floorboard in my closet. It became my secret place, a sanctuary made of paper scraps and candy wrappers and tiny breaths of freedom. Then came the night I can't forget. I was 14 and a half, maybe closer to 15. It was late, and I was pretending to be asleep when she came in. I kept my breathing steady, heart pounding like a drum inside a box. She sat on the edge of my bed. I could feel the mattress dip. She whispered, "You think you can hide from me?" My eyes stayed shut. "I made you," she said. "I can unmake you too." I didn't move, didn't speak. And for the first time, she left without touching me. The next morning, my locket was gone. The one she'd given me years before, the one I'd started leaving on my nightstand to avoid its weight around my neck. It sat on my plate at breakfast, cracked down the middle. I said nothing. She smiled over her coffee, like we shared some private joke. My father didn't notice. He just ate his eggs and asked if anyone had seen his good socks. Around this time I began writing letters, not to anyone, just to myself. Pages filled with everything I couldn't say out loud. I kept them in the floorboard too. There were days when those pages were the only thing that kept me from screaming. Or worse, I'd write until my hand cramped, until the words bled out like poison. Sometimes I burned them in the fireplace when she wasn't home, watching the ashes curl like secrets too dangerous to exist. One Friday, I came home from school to find my room spotless. Too spotless. The floorboard was nailed shut. I stood there, frozen, trying to breathe. When she walked in behind me, she didn't say a word, just handed me a slice of pie and said, "Clean rooms are good for clear minds." That night I didn't sleep. I didn't cry either. Something inside me hardened. She'd read everything. She knew, but she hadn't said a word about it. That was her power. Silence as a weapon. And I realized she wasn't going to stop until she broke me. But I wasn't going to break. Not the way she wanted. I started spending more time with Rosemary. I'd lie about study groups, choir practice, anything that bought me a few more hours away from that house. Sometimes we'd sit in the back of the library, pretending to read, our knees barely touching. One afternoon, she looked at me and said, "You've got something dark in your eyes." I laughed, tried to brush it off, but she just said, "If you ever need to leave, you can come with me." I mean it. I wanted to believe her, but running away felt like a fantasy. Where would we go? What would we eat? I didn't even have $20 to my name. The tipping point came the night my father got sick. He came home coughing, sweating, said it was just a cold. But within days, he couldn't get out of bed. Vivian played nurse, brought him tea, changed the sheets, sat by his side with a damp cloth. To anyone else, she was Florence Nightingale, but I saw the shift. With him weak, I was completely hers again. She'd lean close to his ear and whisper things I couldn't hear. Then she'd look at me with eyes that gleamed like glass under moonlight. One night, I came home to find her sitting in his room, reading the Bible out loud while he slept. She turned to me and said, "He won't last much longer. Then it's just us again, just like it's meant to be." I didn't answer. I just stared. Because in that moment, I understood. She didn't love him. She never had. He was the mask, the shield, the witness she needed to keep things looking clean. And now she was planning for a life without that shield. So I started planning too. I didn't know exactly what I'd do yet. But I knew one thing. The house changed after that. Every corner felt tighter, every sound sharper. Even the walls seemed to lean in closer. My father lay in bed most days, his voice thin, his hands cold, no matter how many blankets covered him. He smiled when I brought him soup, whispered thanks with dry lips, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew something wasn't right, even if he didn't have the strength to say it out loud. Or maybe he didn't want to know. Vivian hovered like a shadow, always near, never still. She cooked his meals, measured his pills, kept a notebook of everything he did. Anyone else would have called her devoted, but I saw how she tightened the spoon in her grip, how her eyes glazed over when he coughed for too long. She wasn't grieving, she was waiting, counting. I kept quiet, but inside, I was bursting. I'd started hiding money. Not much, just coins I found in his coat pockets, the ones he forgot to take when he left for work. I slipped them behind the lining of my school bag, under the soles of old shoes, anywhere she wouldn't think to check. Every quarter felt like a brick in the foundation of my escape. At school, Rosemary began to ask more questions. She noticed I flinched when someone raised their voice, that I barely ate during lunch. I didn't give her full answers, but she was patient. One afternoon, as we walked home, she grabbed my hand without warning. I froze, but she didn't let go, just held it like we'd done it 1,000 times before. "Whatever you're carrying," she said, "you don't have to carry it alone." I wanted to believe her, but some weights feel welded to your bones. Back at home, Vivian started locking her bedroom door when I was around. She'd never done that before. It made me uneasy. She also stopped looking me in the eyes. That was new. It wasn't guilt. I knew her too well for that. It was calculation. She was planning something. I just didn't know what. My father got worse. He stopped recognizing things. Called me by my mother's name once. Stared at Vivian like she was someone he couldn't quite place. One night, I heard him mumbling, "I thought I had more time." I sat beside him, held his hand, and he squeezed it like he was trying to anchor himself to something real. I wanted to tell him everything, unload every horror into his ear before it was too late, but the words clogged in my throat. All I could manage was, "I miss you." He nodded like he understood. Vivian found us like that and stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "You should get to bed," she said. "He needs rest." I got up, but not before he squeezed my hand one last time, tighter than before. I didn't sleep that night, just stared at the ceiling, heart beating so loud I was sure she could hear it through the walls. The next morning, the doctor came, a new one. Not the kind from town, but a younger man with soft hands and a clean smile. Said he was sent from Charleston, some referral Vivian had arranged. He examined my father, made notes, and then spoke mostly to her. I stood by, invisible. That was her favorite trick, making me disappear when it mattered most. After he left, she turned to me and said, "Start getting used to the idea. He's not coming back from this." I didn't respond. I just watched the light behind her flicker, dust floating in the air like falling ash. A week passed, then another. My father barely opened his eyes. She kept everyone else away, said he needed privacy. Even the pastor wasn't allowed in. People started whispering, asking why no one had seen Henry Carter in weeks. She smiled through the screen door, offering cookies and fake stories. And they believed her. Why wouldn't they? Then, one Thursday, I came home and his bed was empty. Gone. Sheets folded, pillows fluffed. No body, no trace. I stood there, frozen. "Where is he?" I asked, barely able to breathe. She stood in the kitchen, wiping a plate. "He passed last night," she said, like announcing the weather. "I called the funeral home. It's being handled." Just like that. No goodbye, no last words, just erased. I ran to his closet. Half his clothes were already gone. His shoes, his shaving kit, the pictures he kept on the nightstand. All vanished. My legs went weak. I sat on the floor, dizzy, trying to understand. She walked in, stood over me, and said, "He didn't want a fuss. He left everything to me. And now we move on. As if losing the only person who ever made that house bearable was an inconvenience. I didn't cry. Not then. The tears would have made her feel powerful. I stood up, looked her dead in the eyes, and for the first time I saw something flicker in her. Maybe surprise, maybe annoyance. I turned away before she could speak again. That night I went to the shed, sat where I had all those years ago, cold metal against my back, silence buzzing like a hive around me. I opened my school bag, counted the coins. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get to Charleston. Enough to find Rosemary's aunt, the one she said always kept her door open. Enough to start. I stayed in the shed until the sun rose. Then I walked inside, washed my face, and sat at the kitchen table like nothing had changed. Vivian served breakfast, eggs, toast, orange juice. She asked how I slept. "Fine," I said. My voice didn't shake. She smiled. But I was already gone. Not in body, but in will, and she could feel it. The air in that house thickened after my father vanished. It was like every wall absorbed him and spat back silence. Vivian walked lighter, almost floating, her voice softer, movements more graceful. She wore his favorite cardigan in the mornings, poured his coffee in the mug with the chipped handle as if he were still there to drink it. Rituals. But for whom? People came around asking questions. Mr. Langford from next door knocked one afternoon with a casserole and too many words. Said he was sorry to hear about Henry, asked about the service. Vivian blinked, tilted her head, and said it had been private, quiet, just how he wanted. She smiled, touched his arm, and closed the door gently, then turned to me and said, "Nosy people always make the worst friends." I didn't answer. She didn't expect me to. School became harder to face, not because of the work or the classmates, but because Rosemary had started noticing the cracks I was trying to seal. I'd stare out the window too long, drift in the middle of conversations. One day, she pulled me aside near the gym and said, "I know something's wrong. You don't have to lie." I wanted to tell her everything, pour the whole rotten truth into her hands and beg her to fix me. But the words jammed like broken teeth in my mouth. I just shook my head and whispered, "Soon." That night I packed a bag. Nothing big, just what I could carry without raising suspicion. I wrapped my saved money in an old scarf, tucked it deep into the lining of my backpack. Clothes, toothpaste, the necklace Rosemary gave me for Christmas, a paperback she'd lent me about a girl who runs away to find her mother. It wasn't much, but it felt like armor. Vivian knocked on my door later, called out that dinner was ready. Her voice was light, too cheerful. I answered with a dull, "Coming," stuffed the bag under my bed, and followed her down. She'd made roast chicken, mashed potatoes, peas arranged in a neat little circle on the plate, the kind of meal she only made when she wanted to play house. We ate in silence. Every scrape of the fork felt louder than the last. Halfway through the meal, she set down her glass and looked at me like she'd been waiting for the right moment. "You're growing into a fine young woman," she said. "Soon enough, you'll see how much I've taught you." My stomach turned. I chewed the chicken without tasting it, nodding once to avoid her gaze. She reached across the table, touched my hand. "You'll thank me one day." I pulled back slowly. She didn't flinch. That was Thursday. I planned to leave Saturday at dawn, before the sun had time to climb over the rooftops. I'd walk to the edge of town, catch the first bus east, find Rosemary's aunt, and start fresh. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was mine. Friday dragged like wet wool. Every second felt heavier. At school, Rosemary passed me a note. "Tomorrow?" I nodded when no one was looking. We didn't need to speak. Everything between us hummed in silence. After class, we sat on the swings behind the gym, hands close but not touching. She said, "If anything goes wrong, come to the orchard behind the church. I'll wait all morning." I promised I would. That night I slept in clothes, bag ready, shoes by the door, heart a jackhammer behind my ribs. The house was dark, quiet. I lay on the bed counting backward from 100, trying to slow my breath. Around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps. Light, deliberate. They stopped outside my room. The doorknob twisted, locked. Vivian knocked once, then again, harder. "Open the door, Mabel." I stayed silent. My body screamed run, but I didn't move. She knocked again, more insistent. "I know what you're doing. You think I don't feel it?" I held my breath. "I've seen your bag. You think you can leave me?" Her voice cracked, but not from sadness, from rage. She pounded once more. "Open! This door!" The silence that followed felt like drowning. She walked away. I waited longer. Eventually, I heard her door close. At sunrise, I slipped out, bare feet on the floorboards, backpack over one shoulder, heart rattling like loose nails. The porch creaked under my weight. I didn't look back. The road felt endless, but familiar. I'd walked it 1,000 times in dreams, past the bakery, the shuttered hardware store, the field where kids played football in summer. My shoes bit into my heels. The bag bounced with every step, but I didn't stop. At the church, I saw her. Rosemary stood by the orchard fence, arms crossed, eyes scanning the horizon. When she spotted me, her shoulders dropped. She ran the few steps between us, hugged me tight. No questions, just warmth. We walked for miles. She didn't say where we were going at first, just took my hand and led. Eventually we reached the bus station. I'd never been there before. It smelled of fuel and old coffee. She handed the clerk her aunt's address, asked for 2 tickets. "One way," she said. The man didn't blink. We sat on the bench, the morning chill biting through our sweaters. I glanced at her. "You sure?" She nodded. "You?" I managed a smile, though it didn't reach my eyes. "As sure as I've ever been." The bus pulled in, doors open. We stood, and behind us we heard it. My name, screamed, sharp, familiar. Vivian, running, face twisted, hair wild, arms flailing. She saw me. I froze. Rosemary grabbed my hand. "Don't. Look, I didn't." I stepped onto the bus, and for the first time in years, the bus doors closed just as she reached the curb. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My legs wouldn't let me, and my heart was already doing enough damage to the inside of my chest. Rosemary squeezed my hand, not gently but firm, like she knew I needed something real to anchor me. The engine groaned, and we pulled away from the station, leaving behind the town I'd memorized in nightmares. I sat stiff, eyes locked on the cracked vinyl of the seat in front of me. The window beside me showed trees, power lines, stretches of broken road, but I barely registered them. Everything inside me was burning. Not from fear, not anymore. It was something deeper, like I'd stepped out of one cage only to carry its bars with me. She chased that bus. I could feel it. Maybe not with her legs, but with everything else. Her voice, her threats, the way she had rewritten my name to mean something I never wanted. Even with the wheels rolling and the town fading into a distant shape, I didn't feel free, just in motion. Rosemary didn't speak for a while. She let me breathe, or at least try. Hours passed like mud. We changed buses in a bigger town, then again in another. I didn't sleep. Every time my eyes shut, I saw her face at the window, distorted, screaming. I kept my bag clutched to my chest, afraid someone might take it or unzip it and find all the broken parts of me inside. We reached Charleston just after sundown. Lights everywhere, cars honking, people rushing by like they had somewhere to be. I hadn't seen that many strangers in years. My knees wobbled when I stepped off the bus. My body had been tense so long it didn't know how to be still anymore. Rosemary stayed close. Her aunt's place wasn't far, just a few blocks from the station. She hailed a cab. I'd never ridden in one before. The driver looked at us through the mirror but didn't ask questions. The apartment smelled like cinnamon and lemon cleaner. A woman with tight braids and a firm voice opened the door, looked us up and down, then pulled us inside like she'd been expecting a hurricane. Her name was Etta. She didn't smile much, but her presence was solid. She gave me a blanket, pointed to the couch, and said, "You're safe here. That's all you need to know for now." I slept for 13 hours. When I woke, sunlight poured through slats in the blinds, and Rosemary was already in the kitchen. She handed me toast. No words, just a soft nod. My hands shook when I reached for it. I didn't have to explain. She knew. Etta asked a few questions later. Nothing invasive. Just where I came from, if someone might be looking, if I had any injuries she needed to see. I lied a little, left out the worst parts. She saw through it but didn't push. She said, "Truth will come when it's ready. Until then, we deal with what's in front of us." Days turned into weeks. I started helping around the apartment. Cleaning, folding laundry, walking to the corner store for groceries. Small things, but each one felt like a reclamation. I found moments of quiet that didn't come with a cost. I learned to breathe without waiting for footsteps in the hallway. But healing doesn't move in straight lines. One night I heard a woman's voice outside arguing with someone. The tone, the cadence, it shot ice through me. I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding like fists on a door. Rosemary found me curled near the heater, barely breathing. She knelt, whispered, "She's not here. She can't find you." I wanted to believe her, but Vivian lived in my skin now. She was woven into the fabric of every fear. Etta gave me a journal, said I didn't have to talk, but I had to get it out somehow. I wrote in it every day, sometimes nonsense, sometimes memories I thought I'd buried. I wrote until my fingers hurt. And then, for the first time in years, I wrote my name without shame. Mabel Louise Carter, just letters, not chains. Rosemary started school again. I didn't. I wasn't ready. The thought of classrooms, hallways, lockers, it made my stomach turn. Instead, I stayed close to the apartment. Sometimes walked to the library, watched people from the windows. The world moved so fast here. Nobody asked who I was. Nobody cared. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. Then, one afternoon, I saw her. Not Vivian, but someone who looked like her. Across the street from the grocery store. Same walk, same sharp posture, same dark coat. I dropped the basket, ran all the way back to the apartment, slammed the door, locked it 3 times, sank to the floor, sobbing. Etta didn't say a word. She just sat with me, let me fall apart. Later she told me she'd called a friend, a social worker, said maybe it was time to make things official. That night I stared at the ceiling for hours. I thought about going back, about what would happen if I stayed silent forever. But then I remembered the way Vivian said my name, like she owned it, like she could bend it into something foul, and I knew I had to speak. The next morning I asked to talk. Not everything, not yet, but enough. Etta wrote things down, names, places, dates, her hand steady, face unreadable. When I finished, she said, "That's enough for now." I cried into her sweater. She didn't flinch. That was the first time I felt the weight begin to lift. It wasn't gone, but it had shifted. The day after I spoke to Etta, everything around me seemed louder. The sound of cars outside, the ticking of the clock in the kitchen, the way the floor creaked beneath my steps. It was as if the world was finally acknowledging me. I kept expecting to feel relief, like people said happens when you finally speak truth aloud. But what settled inside me wasn't peace. It was dread, like I'd opened a door that couldn't be shut again. Etta didn't treat me differently. She still handed me the grocery list with a pen tucked into the spiral, still asked me to water the plants on the balcony. Her steadiness calmed me, gave structure to the chaos swirling in my head. Rosemary watched me more closely now, like she was waiting for me to collapse. But I didn't. I'd done enough collapsing for one life. A woman came by later that week, said she worked for child services. Her smile was stiff, like she'd practiced it in the mirror and never figured out how to relax her eyes. She asked if I wanted to press charges. I didn't know how to answer. Part of me wanted the earth to open and swallow Vivian whole. Another part wanted to pretend she never existed. I asked, "What happens if I say yes?" She said they'd open a case, interview witnesses, collect statements, try to build something that could hold up in court. I said, "What if I say no?" She paused. "Then it ends here, but it won't go away." "Not really." I didn't respond. That night I lay awake tracing my fingers over the scars no one could see, the places she touched that never healed. I thought about how long she might have kept going if I hadn't run. How many more nights I would have spent pretending sleep, praying she'd change her mind, hoping to vanish. And then I thought about other girls, ones like me, ones she might find if she ever remarried, took in a niece, got a job at a school or a church. The idea turned my stomach. She didn't stop because she regretted anything. She stopped because I left. The next morning, I told the woman from services that I wanted to go forward. Her pen froze for a second before she started writing again. She nodded, eyes softer this time. Maybe she'd heard too many no's to expect a yes. Things moved fast after that. They took a formal statement, asked me to describe everything. No detail too small. I spoke slowly, as if the words might rot in my mouth if rushed. Each sentence scraped something raw. Etta sat with me through the whole process, never interrupting, never judging. Just present. They told me Vivian might be contacted, that she'd be made aware of the accusations. The word itself made me flinch. Accusation. As if what happened to me needed proving. I asked if she could come find me. They said it was unlikely, but not impossible. So I stopped leaving the apartment alone. Rosemary started walking with me everywhere again, to the library, to the market, to the clinic where I met with a counselor once a week. I didn't talk much during those sessions, but just being in a room where I could say whatever I wanted without consequences felt like some kind of miracle. One evening, Rosemary brought home a Polaroid camera, said she wanted to take pictures of everything we hadn't lost. We took one in front of the fountain near the courthouse, another by the corner bakery that gave out free samples if you smiled enough, and one on the balcony with the city behind us and our hair tangled from the wind. I kept that one in my journal. A month passed, then two. Then a letter came from Florence, stamped, official. Etta opened it first, read it twice, handed it to me with a look I couldn't decipher. Inside was a statement. Vivian had been contacted. She denied everything, said I was troubled, unstable, that I had made up the entire story for attention, that she had loved me like her own daughter. I laughed when I read it, not because it was funny, because of how familiar it felt. She was rewriting the story again, just like she always did, taking my words, twisting them into shapes that fit her better. But this time, I wasn't 9, and I wasn't scared of her anymore. They said there'd be a hearing, that she might be required to testify, that I might have to stand in front of strangers and repeat the most humiliating pieces of my past, while she sat and smiled across the room. I said I'd do it. Not for revenge, not for closure, for truth. I wanted my name back. That week, I wrote a letter to her. I never mailed it, but I read it out loud to Rosemary one night when sleep wouldn't come. I told Vivian she didn't win, that every scar she gave me had turned into armor, that I wasn't her project anymore, that I had learned what love looked like by seeing everything she was not. Rosemary cried. I didn't. We burned the letter on the balcony, watched the ash lift into the dark like smoke signals no one would read. A few days later, I received another notice. The hearing was set, 3 weeks. I circled the date on the calendar with a red marker, stared at it for a long time. I wasn't ready, but I would be, because monsters only survive in silence. The days leading up to the hearing didn't feel real. I went through them like I was walking through water, everything moving slower than it should. Every morning I woke up thinking maybe something had changed, that maybe someone would call and say it was over, that I didn't have to do this. But the phone stayed silent, and the date on the calendar stayed the same. I crossed off the days with a thick red marker like I was scratching away pieces of a nightmare. Rosemary helped me choose what to wear. Something simple, nothing too bright, nothing too faded. Etta said it shouldn't matter what I looked like, that Truth didn't wear a dress. But I knew better. People judge what they see before they hear a word you say. I chose a navy skirt and a blouse that didn't cling too tight. I looked in the mirror and saw a girl trying to be her own mother. The night before, I couldn't eat. The smell of food made my stomach flip. I sat on the balcony with a blanket wrapped around me, watching headlights slice through the dark. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the courtroom. Long benches, faces turned toward me, her eyes locked on mine. Etta came out and sat beside me. She didn't say anything at first, just held a mug between her palms like she was absorbing heat. Then she said, "It's not about convincing them. It's about releasing yourself." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The words were too big for the space inside me. When morning came, I moved like someone who didn't belong in their own skin. I showered, dressed, braided my hair. Rosemary handed me a small pin with a blue stone in the center. She said her grandmother used to wear it when she needed strength. I clipped it to my collar without a word. The courthouse wasn't what I expected. The walls were yellowed, the ceiling cracked, the floors smelled like bleach and old wood. Nothing about it felt official. It felt like a place where people waited to be judged. We sat in a room that buzzed with whispers and the rustling of papers. My name was called. I stood up on legs that didn't want to hold me. They led me through a hallway that felt too narrow. Every step echoed like a drumbeat. When I entered the courtroom, the first thing I saw was her, Vivian, sitting straight, hands folded, mouth pressed into a line. She looked older, not weaker, not softer, just older. Her eyes scanned the room and found mine. No expression, no surprise, like she'd been expecting me. I sat across from her. My heart pounded so loud I was sure the judge could hear it. The room blurred around the edges. People spoke. Legal terms I didn't understand floated in and out of my ears. Then they asked me to speak. I stood. My mouth felt dry. I glanced at Etta, then at Rosemary. They didn't smile, didn't nod, just looked back with the kind of stillness I needed. I started talking. At first my voice cracked. I stumbled through the first few sentences. But then something settled in me, a rhythm. I told them what happened. Not every detail, but enough. I told them how she manipulated silence, how she weaponized love, how I'd spent years convincing myself I was the problem, how leaving didn't feel like freedom. It felt like war. The room stayed quiet. I didn't look at Vivian. I couldn't, but I could feel her watching me. When I finished, I sat down slowly, hands in my lap, fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. Someone asked her to respond. She stood. Her voice was steady. She denied everything, said I had always been unstable, that I had behavioral issues, that I lied for attention, said she tried to help me, that she was the one who suffered. Her tone was calm, her face soft. She wept once, a single tear she dabbed with a folded tissue. Her performance was flawless. I didn't flinch. The judge asked questions. Lawyers argued. Time passed in waves. I don't remember every word, but I remember the way it felt to sit there, fully seen, fully heard, not just by strangers, but by myself. When the session ended, I didn't wait for the decision. It would come later, in letters, through phone calls, maybe with more meetings. I didn't need it that day. I walked outside, into the afternoon sun. Rosemary followed close. We didn't talk. She took my hand and we walked all the way to the river, the one that cuts through downtown like a scar. We sat on the stone edge, feet dangling, water glinting below. I asked, "Do you think they believe me?" She looked at me, long and quiet, then said, "Does it matter if you believe yourself?" That night, I slept without nightmares for the first time in over a decade. It wasn't over, but something had shifted, like the wind had finally changed direction. The days after the hearing passed like pages in a book I didn't want to keep reading but couldn't throw away. There was no big announcement, no gavel crashing down, no camera flashes or justice wrapped in a bow. The court system moved with the speed of molasses, and I learned that truth, even when finally spoken, doesn't always set anything free right away. Sometimes it just opens a wound wider. I kept going to therapy, The counselor asked if I felt relief. I told her I wasn't sure what that was supposed to feel like. She said sometimes the body holds on long after the danger's gone, like it doesn't trust the silence. That made sense to me. I still slept with the light on, still double-checked the locks, still had moments in crowded places where I swore I smelled her perfume, even when I knew it was impossible. Etta stayed the same, never asked for more than I could give, never pushed when I pulled away. She gave me structure without pressure, warmth without strings. Some mornings I helped her with her bookkeeping, organizing receipts and filing envelopes. The quiet helped. Numbers didn't lie, didn't change depending on who was in the room. There was comfort in that. Rosemary and I grew closer, not through grand gestures, but in all the small ways that build something real. She started leaving little notes in the bathroom mirror, jokes scribbled on napkins, small reminders that I wasn't invisible anymore. I kept every one of them in a shoebox under the bed, not because I thought they'd vanish, but because I wanted proof that someone saw me and didn't turn away. Then came the envelope. Thick, official. My name printed in bold letters. Inside was the outcome. Vivian wouldn't face jail. The words blurred as I read. They called it insufficient evidence. Said there were contradictions, not enough corroboration, no physical proof. My word against hers. I was too old now for child protections, too young then for adult witness weight. They said the hearing had brought light to serious concerns, but ultimately they couldn't proceed with charges. I sat on the floor of Etta's hallway. Envelope spread open like it held answers instead of echoes. My hands didn't shake, my eyes didn't blur. I just sat there, very still, like if I moved even once, everything I had built would crumble. When Rosemary came home and found me like that, she didn't speak. She knelt beside me, read the page once, then tore it in half without asking. I didn't stop her. We burned the pieces in a chipped ashtray on the balcony, watched them curl into nothing. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurt, but because I'd already shed the tears for something much deeper than a courtroom could ever hold. After that, something hardened in me. Not bitterness, not anger, just a clear-eyed understanding of the world. I knew what I'd been through, knew what she'd taken, and I knew she walked free because the system wasn't built to hold people like her accountable. Monsters who don't leave bruises, who smile while they destroy. I started writing again, not in secret, not in the corners of journals meant to be hidden. I wrote essays, letters, articles. Etta helped me find a local paper willing to publish my words anonymously. I told my story in fragments, changing names, but not truths. The first piece was about silence, the second about control, the third about survival that doesn't look like triumph, just endurance. People wrote back, other girls, women, even a man. They said, "Me too." Some signed their names, others didn't. It didn't matter. What mattered was the connection, the thread between strangers who recognized themselves in my pain. One message stuck with me. A woman from Ohio wrote, "I never told anyone, but I read your story, and now I don't feel alone." I pinned her letter above my desk. Vivian never contacted me, not directly, but I heard from someone that she moved, took a job in another town, still went to church, still hosted bake sales, still smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. The idea of her starting over didn't surprise me. She'd been erasing history her whole life, but I no longer feared her, not because she couldn't hurt me again, but because I'd finally stopped giving her the last word. I turned 17 that spring. Etta baked a cake with lemon frosting and spelled my name wrong on purpose just to make me laugh. Rosemary gave me a pendant shaped like a key, said it was to every door I thought I couldn't open. That night I sat on the balcony alone, stared at the city lights, and realized I had survived. Not just escaped, survived. And that wasn't nothing. It was everything. I didn't expect to see her again. After everything that had been said, after the court, after the article, after the silence that followed, I thought she'd vanish into her next life like a snake shedding its skin. And maybe she thought the same about me, that I'd disappear into my new place, build some quiet future, pretend the past was just a long, strange dream. But that's not how life works. It doesn't close chapters neatly. It loops, it circles, it waits. I was working part-time at a small bookstore not far from Etta's building. Nothing glamorous, just shelving paperbacks, dusting covers, ringing up regulars who liked to chat more than they liked to read. The owner, Miss Hallie, was a widow with too many cats and a habit of forgetting her glasses on top of her head. She paid me under the table, and I didn't ask for more. It was enough. It was a Wednesday, cloudy, the kind of day where everything feels muted. I was setting up a new table of summer reads when I saw her through the front window. At first, I didn't believe it. Thought my eyes were playing some cruel trick, but then she stepped closer to the glass, and I knew, the way she held her purse, the shape of her jaw, that coat, Vivian, right there, outside the bookstore, looking in. Our eyes met, and she smiled, not a wide grin, just a small, knowing curve of the lips, like she just found a misplaced earring. I froze. My hands went numb. I heard the bell over the door before I processed she'd stepped inside. She walked slow, measured, like she belonged there. I stepped back behind the counter, heart banging against my ribs like it wanted out. She looked around casually, fingers grazing spines of books she wasn't really reading. When she finally spoke, it wasn't my name. It was, "You always liked stories with sad endings." I said nothing. She stepped closer. "You look well." Her voice hadn't changed. Smooth, careful, warm in that artificial way that used to make me doubt my own instincts. I clenched the edge of the counter. "You shouldn't be here." She tilted her head. "Is that how we talk now? Strangers?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat had closed. Miss Hallie came out from the back just then, smiling like she always did when new customers walked in. "Can I help you find something, ma'am?" Vivian turned to her, polite as ever. "Just browsing. Thank you." She walked one slow lap around the shelves, then back to the door. Before stepping out, she looked over her shoulder at me and said, "Some stories don't end the way you want them to. You should remember that." Then she left. I stood there long after she was gone, shaking so hard I dropped the stack of books in my hands. Miss Hallie asked if I was all right. I nodded, lied, said I felt dizzy, took the rest of the day off. I didn't go straight home. I walked, for hours, up and down streets I barely recognized, shoes rubbing blisters into my heels. I tried to convince myself it didn't mean anything, that it was a fluke, that she'd been passing through and didn't know I worked there. But that smile, that tone, she knew. When I finally made it back, Etta was in the kitchen, cooking something that smelled like cinnamon and clove. I sat at the table and said, "She found me?" She didn't ask who. She knew. She turned off the stove and sat across from me, hands folded like she was preparing to pray. I told her everything. She didn't speak until I finished. Then she said, "What do you want to do?" And I realized I didn't know. I thought I wanted distance, safety. But now, with her face still fresh in my mind, I felt something deeper, something I'd buried. I wanted truth to mean something. The next day, I called the paper that had published my piece, asked if they'd be willing to use my real name in the next one. The editor hesitated, said it came with risks. I told him I understood. I spent the weekend writing. Every word bled. I didn't just talk about what happened in that house. I wrote about the aftermath, the silence, the doubt, the way systems fail girls who look too quiet to be believed. I wrote about courtrooms, about denial, about seeing her walk free while I carried her fingerprints under my skin. And I wrote about power, how taking it back doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it's ink. Sometimes it's just refusing to forget. The piece ran on a Monday. My full name, my full truth. I braced for backlash. What I got was something else. Letters, emails, people stopping by the store, not to gawk, but to thank, to whisper their own stories, to say they felt less alone. Some cried, some shook my hand. One woman hugged me so hard I thought I'd break, then just said, "You saved someone." Probably more than one. Vivian never came back, but someone else did. A man, mid-40s, nervous, said he knew her years ago, said he always thought something was off, said he'd read my article and wanted to say sorry for not seeing it, for not speaking up, for thinking smiles meant safety. I didn't blame him. I didn't comfort him either. That week, I got a call from someone in law enforcement. Said the article had prompted others to come forward. New complaints, different names, different stories, but the same pattern. They were building a new case. I wasn't the only one anymore. When they said the case was being reopened, I didn't know whether to exhale or fold back into myself like I used to when she'd knock on my bedroom door without saying a word. It wasn't just me anymore. Other women had come forward, some older, others younger, some who'd crossed paths with her years before, in different towns, through jobs or church groups or neighborhood events. Strangers to me, but their stories echoed my own in ways that made my stomach twist. They talked about the same tone in her voice, the way she smiled without warmth, the silence she used to trap people, how affection with her always came with a price. And when those voices began to stack together, the picture started changing. What once was just my word hanging in the air now had weight. Now it filled a room. They asked if I'd testify again. I didn't even hesitate. I just said yes, not because I thought I had something new to prove, not because I believed the system had suddenly become fair, but because this time it wasn't just my story. This time I wasn't alone on that stand. I wasn't the first crack in her mask anymore. I was one of many, and that changed everything. The lead up to the trial was quieter than the first time. Less fear, more focus. I wasn't the girl clutching her words like they might disappear. I was older now. I had steadier hands. My voice didn't tremble when I practiced. Rosemary sat with me through it all, like always. And Etta made sure I ate, made sure I slept, made sure I knew I had people. And that matters more than folks admit. When you've spent years being alone inside pain, having someone brush your hair back without asking questions feels like a revolution. The trial was held in a different courthouse, with new faces and a different judge, but the moment she walked in, it felt like nothing had changed at all. She looked exactly the same. Not older, not frail, just polished, composed, like she was arriving at a church function instead of being called to answer for what she'd done. She wore navy, her hair pinned the same way she used to do on Sundays. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away, but I didn't look at her for long, either. There was no need to meet her eyes anymore. When it was my turn, I stood without anyone having to steady me. I took the oath, sat down, and I spoke. I told the court what happened in my house, in my room, in the small moments where no one was watching. I didn't dress it up. I didn't soften the edges. I just laid it out, the way you might spread cards on a table. I explained how silence became normal, how fear disguised itself as routine, how I grew up thinking pain was just something girls were meant to carry. I talked about leaving, about seeing her at the bookstore, about the first time I finally said out loud that she didn't win. The courtroom was still. Nobody shifted. Nobody whispered. When I finished, I didn't look to see her reaction. I just stepped down, walked back to my seat, and held my chin up like I'd promised myself I would. Other women testified too, one after another, like a slow wave pulling back the years. They didn't cry. They didn't need to. Their words had a sharpness that cut through the courtroom better than tears ever could. Her lawyer tried to paint us as confused, coordinated, as if we were feeding off each other's trauma. But the stories didn't need to match in detail to land the same blow. The pattern was enough. When the verdict came, I didn't hold my breath. I didn't pray. I just waited, calm, like someone who already knew how it would end. Guilty, not of everything, but enough. Enough for her to face consequences. Enough for the truth to no longer live in shadows. Afterward, I stepped outside and felt the wind hit my face like it had been waiting for me. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I just stood there, solid. Rosemary came up behind me, linked her fingers with mine, and said nothing. Etta joined us, handed me a thermos of coffee, like we were just three women running errands on a Tuesday. And maybe that's what healing looks like, doing ordinary things with the weight finally shifted off your back. Life moved on after that, not in leaps, but in slow, steady steps. I kept working at the bookstore. I started writing more, not just about what happened, but about things that made me feel alive again, about mornings that smelled like cinnamon, about conversations that felt like home, about the way Rosemary always stole the last fry, even though she swore she didn't like them. I still carry her shadow sometimes, still have moments when the dark feels too close. But now, I know what light tastes like. I know that surviving her didn't just mean leaving the house. It meant learning to stay with myself after the fact. It meant waking up and knowing that I wasn't hers, that I was never hers, that I belonged to me. If this story touched something in you, sweetheart, go ahead and leave a like for me. And if you've got anything to share, even just a small piece of your own journey, drop a comment below. I'll read it with care. Sometimes just knowing someone's listening makes the pain a little easier to carry. Thank you for staying with me till the end.